What actually happens when you send negative energy out into the world? Whether you call it a curse, a hex, a prayer, or just a really, really bad thought, is there a price to be paid? Okay, let's get into this, because it seems like the universe, or maybe just our own minds, has a pretty fascinating way of balancing the books. Our story today really starts with this post from a user on Reddit. They tried to get a little magical revenge on someone who had caused them a lot of emotional trauma, and they specifically targeted their finances. But instead of the target suffering, the spellcaster's own life started to completely fall apart. I mean, it's a textbook case of what looks like some serious magical blowback.
So, that brings us to the big question at the heart of our explainer today. What really happens when a spell goes wrong? We're going to look at this through three totally different lenses: the magical community itself, a broader spiritual framework, and, believe it or not, modern psychology.
All right, first up, how did the actual spellcasting community diagnose this problem? I mean, when our Reddit user asked for help, the answers came flooding in, and they pointed to some very specific, almost mechanical reasons why this happened. Okay, so the first and most common theory that popped up was pretty fascinating. Another user basically suggested the intended victim wasn't a soft target at all. They might have had their own spiritual protections up, like a shield or a ward that just, boop, bounced that negative energy right back where it came from. Someone else put it even more bluntly. They said what the original poster was going through wasn't just random bad luck. It was a literal, magical return to sender. The curse, because it couldn't find its target, just followed the energetic trail right back to its source. So the community didn't see this as some big cosmic mystery. Nope, they pointed to some really clear practitioner errors. Things like, forgetting to put up your own protections, or not doing a little divination first to see what you're even up against, or maybe just skipping the spiritual cleansing. Essentially, it's like charging into battle with no armor, no map, and no idea how strong the other guy is. But this whole idea of energy coming back to you, it isn't just about simple mistakes. For a lot of practitioners, it's governed by a really fundamental, unseen role of the universe. In some Wiccan traditions, this gets formalized into what's called the Rule of Three, or the Law of Return. Think of it like a kind of karmic physics. Whatever you send out, whether it's good or bad, comes back to you, but amplified threefold. And listen, this isn't just some casual belief. It's a huge pillar of Wiccan morality. It's a powerful guide for ethical behavior. I mean, if you truly believe that any harm you cause is going to come flying back at you 3 times stronger, you're going to think very, very carefully before you act. But here's where it gets really interesting. This whole concept of a boomerang effect isn't just confined to witchcraft. You can find echoes of this exact idea, that our intentions have consequences that circle back to us in so many different belief systems. So now we're going to look at 2 very different ways of understanding these forces: a spiritual perspective that's centered on divine gifts, and a psychological one that's focused on the hidden parts of our very own minds.
So on one side, you have the spiritual view of a seer, someone with a gift to see into the spirit realm. And on the other, you have the psychological view from Carl Jung, who talked about the parts of ourselves we show the world, our persona, versus the parts we hide away in our unconscious shadow.
The seer perspective suggests that having a spiritual gift is kind of like being a gifted athlete. You have a choice. You can use that talent to help others and align with what this source calls the kingdom of God, or you can use it for your own selfish gain, which aligns you with negative forces, the domain of darkness. The consequence, then, isn't really a punishment. It's just the direct result of the side you chose to play for. This whole thing raises a really fascinating question, though. Are these consequences the result of invisible spiritual laws? Or could there be something going on inside our own heads that produces the exact same outcome? So let's pull on that psychological thread. This brings us to the incredible work of psychoanalyst Carl Jung and his whole concept of the shadow. Jung's idea of the shadow is, well, it's basically everything we've repressed about ourselves. It's all the traits, the desires, the memories we find unacceptable or embarrassing. It's not necessarily evil, it's just all the stuff we'd rather not look at in the mirror. So what does our mind do with this hidden shadow? Well, a lot of the time it projects it. We see the flaws we can't accept in ourselves as huge moral failings in other people. We attack outwardly what we can't stand to face inwardly. And that is the root of self-sabotage. By focusing all this energy on someone else's supposed flaws, we totally neglect our own, and we let our unhealed wounds just fester and wreak havoc on our lives.
So, from this viewpoint, casting a curse, well, it's not really an attack with supernatural energy. It's an act of psychological projection. You're literally taking your own anger, your own pain, your own shadow, and just hurling it at somebody else.
And this is where it all clicks into place. This famous quote from Jung totally explains the blowback. The negative consequences our Reddit user faced, the financial ruin, that's not a returned spell. It's the destructive patterns of their own unexamined unconscious. When the shadow is running the show, you unconsciously make choices that lead to ruin, all while you're blaming it on fate, or in this case, a backfiring curse. So what we have here are three very different frameworks: magical, spiritual, and psychological. But what's absolutely incredible is that they all lead to the exact same place. Just look at the pattern here. It's the same every single time. A negative outward action is followed by a return of that energy, which then leads to negative consequences for the person who started the whole thing. And the final step then is this unavoidable, often painful lesson in self-awareness. Let's just break it down one last time. The magical framework calls the action sending negative energy, and the consequence is the law of threefold return. The spiritual framework calls it using a gift selfishly, which leads to spiritual conflict. And the psychological framework, it calls it projecting your shadow, and that results in self-sabotage. I mean, they're three completely different paths, but they all arrive at the same destination. So really, call it whatever you want. A rebounded hex, karma, psychological blowback. The core message is identical. What you put out into the world inevitably becomes the world you live in. The echo of your own actions, it always, always finds its way back home. So I'll just leave you with this to think about. What shadows might you be projecting onto other people? And if you listen really, really closely, can you hear the echoes they're already creating in your own life?